Teal deer. Slut-shaming. I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for those pesky dames.
It's not funny, it's not funny, it's not funny, it's not funny, it's not funny! It's not funny!
But seriously, they have no idea what the hell they're talking about. But come with me on a journey of misrepresentative stats and very poorly worded studies, and you will find out why.
This one has been a long time coming. Back in early 2015, Teal Deer responded to a 3-year-old video by a woman named Jenn, who is part of the collab channel, Those Pesky Dames. The video I'm responding to today was originally going to be my first commentary, but I didn't like the final product when I initially posted it back in April of 2016, so I shelved it until I had time to do it. Well, I figured now was a better time than ever. Teal Deer has become irrelevant within his own community, and I'm responding to a 3-year-old response to a video that was 3 years old when he responded to it.
Hello viewers.
And neck-bearded, fedora-wearing virgins of the internet.
Hey, at least the blue-furred ungulate knows his audience.
This week on Those Pesky Dames we're going to be talking about slut-shaming, which is a topic so huge that I can't say everything I'd like to. Before we begin, this brings up some potentially triggering issues.
Overly sensitive viewers may wish to familiarise themselves with the quickest route to their nearest Tumblr panic room now.
Teal Deer doesn't understand trigger warnings. Imagine my shock. The next minute or so is our blue friend cracking dumb jokes, so I'll be snipping out every pointless tangent he wanders off into throughout the entire video. Don't worry, I'm not editing out anything meaningful.
So, sluts. Slut, whore, tramp, skank are words, along with a whole host of others, used to insult women.
Dick, cock, penis, bell end, scrotum are words, along with a whole host of others, used to insult men.
Dick can be gender neutral. Cock can be a general swear word. False equivalence. Jen's set of words is specific examples of words used to demean women for enjoying sex. Your set of words are just used as general I don't like you insults, and have general purpose uses as well.
One thing I want to say immediately is that judging someone else's sex life or perceived sex life is not okay. Whether a woman sleeps with 5 people in a week or with nobody ever, it's none of your fucking business. So stop imposing your own standards on other people and making them feel really shitty for no reason. Okay?
Yeah, you totally shouldn't be allowed to judge people by their actions or indeed the merit of those actions. Especially if that person is a woman and your judgment makes her feel bad.
Thanks, Joffrey from Game of Thrones. Got any more misogynistic bullshit to pull out of your ass? Also, isn't your whole channel whining about feminism making men feel bad? Stones at glass houses, asshole. Stones at glass houses.
But hey, let me give you an example here. A man is interested in having a monogamous sexual relationship with a woman. He then finds out that that woman that he is interested in pursuing for a monogamous relationship, she likes to go out every night and have a new sexual encounter with a different man, and has in fact in the past been found to have sexual encounters with multiple men at the same time. It is completely within her right to do all of these things. Is it then wrong for that man to look at that woman and then question not only if she is willing to be in a monogamous relationship, but that if she is even capable of such a thing? By your definition, this is slut-shaming and is wrong. In reality, this is one person assessing their life goals, comparing those to the life goals of another person, and realizing that there is little to no correlation, which then leads them to conclude that pursuit of said monogamous relationship would be folly, which seems entirely reasonable when you actually think about it.
Except this isn't mulling over, our lifestyles may be incompatible, you disingenuous little shit. Slut-shaming is saying that a woman who may not at the moment be interested in monogamy is morally failing as a woman. Yet men who prefer to play the field over settling down and getting married right out of high school aren't seen as morally failing as men, except maybe by the extreme fringes of the religious right and alt-right.
We have such a messed up standard at play for women and sexuality in our society. Earlier this year I attended the UK Slut Walk along with, I think, most of the other dames, and Slut Walk is something that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a minute. My sign read, "This virgin whore dichotomy is getting pretty fucking old." And it is. On one hand, women are meant to be good girls and be modest and, God forbid, never ever want to have sex, because if you do then you're a slut or an animal or unnatural. But on the other hand, we're meant to look hot and sexually available at all times, and if we don't do that then we're prissy or frigid or stuck up.
Would you like to generalize a little bit more? Because this sounds like it's a vast array of opinions held by a vast array of people. I'm pretty sure that no one person has ever said all of those things together, let alone attached any sort of quantifiable number or boundary to any of those criteria.
Oh look, the obligatory not all men from the sneering little prick with the Bambi avatar.
There's no room for manoeuvre. How are we meant to express our sexuality in a healthy way?
By doing what you want to do and saying fuck the haters, while also accepting that your actions do have consequences. It really doesn't get much more simple than that.
Are you talking about unplanned pregnancy, perhaps? Or STDs? You are aware, of course, that there are measures people who engage in sex frequently take in order to protect themselves, right? Abstinence-only education is the reason so many practice unsafe sex. Every action in life has a risk. Do we avoid driving a car or using public transportation because there's a risk of a car accident? And when it happens, do we say, well, they had it coming. They should have known the risks of driving a car. Nope, and we should have the same standards for all activities.
Slutwalk happened because of the ridiculous comments of one Toronto police officer, Michael Sanguinetti. He said that women should avoid dressing like sluts in order not to be victimised. This implies that if you dress provocatively or like a slut, then you deserve everything that's coming to you, that you're asking for it. And you're not. Rape or sexual assault or sexual harassment is never, ever the victim's fault. Ever. You are not to blame for it. I promise.
Clothing carries connotations and sends a message. You may not like that fact, but it is true.
Clothing carries connotations? Really?
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
Seriously, you blue little wankstain? Do you believe that how someone chooses to dress carries biological connotations? Do you realize that clothing can carry different connotations from person to person? Weren't you going on and on about how different people have different ideas? And here's the reason I use the clip I've used for every anti-feminist garbage dumpster of a human being. He goes straight into victim blaming. If you wear clothing I find attractive, it's your fault if you get raped, is the message I'm getting from you. How about if someone finds women in sunglasses attractive? Does she deserve to be sexually harassed because she wants to keep her eyes safe in the bright sunlight? What if someone finds raincoats attractive? Is she asking for it by not opting to use an umbrella instead to keep dry in the rain?
I'm going to give you some facts about rape, which are inevitably heartbreaking. But unless we begin to acknowledge these facts and talk about them, we're never going to dispel the idea that rape happens to women who are sluts. UCLA researchers found that 54% of teenage boys thought it was acceptable to rape a woman if she led him on. So don't tell me that we don't need to keep pointing out that rape is a bad thing, because clearly not everybody knows it is.
Well, let's have a look at some of those sources, shall we? So the first study that you link to is not actually a study at all. It is in fact just the abstract of the study. And the first sentence of that abstract instantly makes me very suspicious of the motives of the people writing this study.
Ever wonder why so many of these puerile little dumpster fires are such pedantic little weasels? They learned from the master himself.
Let's read it, shall we? Unlike stranger rape, acquaintance rape, particularly dating rape, takes place in the context of normal social activity. That is a hell of an assertion to make at the beginning of an abstract, and it really makes it sound like the authors of this paper are trying to push a very specific narrative.
Teal Deer is now pretending that date rape taking place due to ignored consent is uncommon.
There is also no actual reference in this abstract to that 54% that you've quoted.
Did you read the RAIN studies? She was most likely averaging the 50% and 59%, which would give 54.5%. If you want to be pedantic, which I know you do, you could argue that it more accurately should have been rounded up to 55% instead of 54%. But that's not just splitting the hair, that's splitting the atom. Or more likely, the 54% is from a study you discuss next that says, changes her mind, and he continues.
But hey, I guess the second one is going to back you up, right? And this is where I laugh really hard. Because since you've linked to that study, that domain has in fact been bought by someone else. And actually, this page now hosts a very large image explaining to you in several ways how this supposed poll is complete and utter bullshit.
You do know you're responding to a 3-year-old video, right? Actually, it dawned on me that this is why you responded to it. So you could throw out sources you dislike, being the true masturbator you are. And yes, I'm referring to members of the anti-feminist community as masturbators because I refuse to validate them as skeptics. They're not skeptics. I wouldn't be surprised if you domain squatted and created your own image after buying up that domain. You make enough money on YouTube that I'm sure it was a small enough price to pay in order to make a joke.
It does simple little things like point out that the original questionnaire was not yes or no, and was in fact on a 5-point sliding scale, which means that later on, someone came along and somehow correlated a yes or no answer out of questions where the answer came in degrees of 5 instead of a binary, which is incredibly suspicious to say the least. So yeah, thanks for not only linking a bogus source, but then also linking a second source that debunked the first.
How does that invalidate the study? At best, you could say it might have simplified it. It's like with sites that include product reviews. 1 to 2 stars is considered a critical review. 4 to 5 stars is seen as a positive review. 3 stars depends on the site, but it's most often critical review. Even so, you did nothing to debunk anything. You were just being your pedantic self as always.
9 out of 10 rape victims are women, and women of colour are more likely to be raped than white women.
Okay, so this one took a little bit of digging considering you didn't actually provide any links to this study. So I went to the RAIN website and I was able to locate their 9 of every 10 rape victims were female in 2003 statistic. Turns out that that statistic comes from a US Department of Justice 2003 National Crime Victimization Survey. And I just so happen to have been able to dig up that exact survey on the internet. And then we wade through all of the information in this document to find out that once again this is a study that has combined rape and sexual assault into one category. Meaning that even if only one person in that category was actually raped and the other hundreds of thousands were not, that you can still read this study and imply that all of them were the victims of rape.
I do believe this is a case of substituting explanation for premise, where you assert something, but that's just pure conjecture on your part. The next minute or so is just him hammering his own made-up point into his audience's heads to make them irrationally angry at Jenn, who never did or said what Teal claimed she did.
And now we're going to deal with your claim of women of colour being raped more often than white women, and I still cannot stand the term people of colour, because every time I hear it, it reminds me of this sort of bullshit.
Boo-hoo, get over it, you sniveling little man-baby.
This study at no point actually breaks down ethnicities of victims of rape, or even victims of sexual assault. The absolute closest that it gets is a table of violent victimization rates of selected demographic categories, in which you can see that yes, people who are black are more likely to be the victims of overall violent crime than people who are white. But once again, this is an incredibly disingenuous claim, based on an extrapolation from numbers that aren't even related to the thing that you are attempting to prove.
Nice escape hatch you manufactured there. Prevents you from actually having to consider that a feminist might actually be right, a fact that would destroy your pathetic, antiquated worldview.
2/3 of rapes are committed by somebody the victim knows.
Actually, it's only 2/3 of assaults, according to RAIN, but because they constantly shuttle things like rape and sexual assault around into varying categories to suit varying numbers for suitable shock value, I can see how you would make this mistake.
Proof by assertion at its finest. Your viewers won't bother to check RAIN sources because they'll take your word for it. There's nothing about combining rape and sexual assault into a single category. This is something you made up for your image macro, and you won't shut up about it.
Nearly 1/3 of people in the UK think that a woman is partially or totally responsible for her rape if she was drunk. Drunken consent is not consent.
Once again, you didn't actually provide a link to this study, and unfortunately I haven't actually been able to find one.
It's a Daily Mail article. You could have found that with a quick Google search. At best, you could criticize her for citing the Daily Fail, but I'm sure the study is other places too.
But let's tackle this from a moral standpoint exclusively then. If someone becomes intoxicated, does that mean that they are now no longer responsible for their own actions?
It means they can't consent. They're not in the state of mind to make rational decisions.
So the drunken woman having sex with a man cannot consent, and is therefore not responsible for her own actions? Does this also mean that the drunk driver is not responsible for their own actions?
Another fallacious argument from our blue friend. It's an all too common comparison I've been hearing for years that I want to address right now. A drunk driver is the person performing the action. They chose to ignore that they're not in a state to drive and drove anyway. The car's not drunk, they are. And this horrible analogy compares a woman to a car. Drunken sex is not the same thing as drunk driving. If both people consent before one or both gets drunk, that's different. Also, if the person initiating sex is drunk and the sober person agrees, that's different. The issue arises when someone, can be a man or woman, but most often is a woman, is given alcohol by a man with the intent of lowering her inhibitions. For your analogy to even work a little, this would be more like drugging the driver who did not choose to drive under the influence. Those kinds of things have happened and are not the same thing as drunk driving.
A third of people in the UK believe that a woman is partially or totally responsible for her own rape if she was flirting. Flirting is not consent. She isn't responsible.
I am just going to call bullshit here. If you are flirting with someone, you know that you are flirting with them, and you know exactly what the purpose of flirting is. While that doesn't excuse rape, it still very heavily implies consent.
Flirting does not imply consent. Let me repeat myself for those in the back. Flirting is not consent. Get it now? He then goes on to cite fake feminist Camille Paglia, one of the tokens used back in the Gamergate days before Cassie J and Lacey Green took the red pill and became conservatives.
Calling someone a slut has really serious implications. It's something that's used not just to insult women, but to devalue them as well. So if a woman is seen as a total slut, then it's okay to pester her for sex, to sexually assault her, to harass her, to rape her. After all, she's just a stupid slut who was asking for it, right?
Again, I would point you to those articles that I referenced earlier that shows that calling someone a slut is not necessarily a sexual term, and is apparently in most cases completely unrelated to sex. People who pester and pressure other people for sex should always be viewed with suspicion, but it is a ridiculous assertion of you to make that it is exclusively women who are the victim of this.
You're the one who came up with women are the sole victims, not her. Other videos by Jenn and a few of her friends discuss the issues that men face, including men being victims of rape and sexual assault. But I digress.
Slut-shaming feeds rape culture. In the UK last year, 5 men in Preston were cleared of charges of gang rape because the woman had, in a previous MSN conversation, once said that she'd fantasized about the idea of group sex. When she arrived at the house of the guy that she'd been talking to, she was greeted by 6 men, all of whom expected to have sex with her. When she refused, because she only wanted to sleep with the one guy she'd gone to see, they raped her. The judge presiding over the case said that her credibility was shot to pieces because of that one conversation. This case is absolutely sickening. Admitting to having a fantasy is not a crime, nor does it justify horrific things being done to you. Desire for something is not consent to the act happening. What those men did to her was rape, and they should have been convicted for it.
In your opinion. However, there was evidence that she not only desired that to happen, but actively encouraged it. This may very well be another in a long string of cases where a woman has sexual fantasies about group sex, and then later regrets it. Which is why over the years there have been several court cases like this that have relied on video evidence to prove innocence.
The whole notion of revokes consent the next day to charge a man with rape to punish him for not being good in bed is just scaremongering by anti-feminists, MRAs, whatever you want to call them. There are no actual instances of this. It's just pathetic scaremongering.
We get this equation drilled into us that woman plus sex equals bad woman. That by having sex she is deserving of insult, of being ostracized for it, of being punished for it. Sex before marriage for women used to be a massive taboo. It could ruin your life. And thankfully we've got over that particular hurdle. But female sexuality still remains as a bad thing in our society.
It's interesting that you should say that, considering there are several women out there who have made entire careers talking about and celebrating female sexuality.
And how do men react to them? Quite negatively.
Controlling women's sexuality is a way of controlling women. Slut is a term used by women as well as men. Through internalized sexism, women are encouraged to compete for male approval and male attention which translates into a very limited kind of power.
Ah, there we go. The good old patriarchy strikes again, because women are in fact incapable of making their own decisions and acting by themselves. Because as we all know, women do not possess free agency. They are always being puppeted by a man.
Nice job of strawmanning Jen's point. You changed societal notions of morality are ingrained in us through cultural teachings from birth into women don't possess free agency and every woman's action is decided by a man. These guys love their strawman arguments.
As Laura Tenenbaum said, slut bashing is a cheap and easy way to feel powerful. If you feel insecure or ashamed about your own sexual desires, all you have to do is call a girl a slut, and suddenly you're the one who is good and on top of the social pecking order.
So it would seem that it is a completely natural thing for people to do to help establish social hierarchies. Sure, it might be a bitchy as fuck way of doing it, but that is very much by the by.
Appeal to nature fallacy. It's a way to establish hierarchies, true, but those are hardly a good thing. The hierarchy in specific is the patriarchal system where women tear each other down for male approval. If we get rid of these systems, then we'll have less of that problem.
And now a really important question which I think we should address here. If slut-shaming is used by women as a social hierarchy pecking order mechanic, and that this is all perpetuated by patriarchal men, somehow, why is it that it is still observable in environments that do not have men, and where the people at the top of the ladder are still women?
Because these systems still exist in a patriarchal society. There are no all-female or female-run societies. Women in patriarchal societies have been conditioned to behave in a certain way, and that doesn't cease to be true when there is no direct male influence. People like Sargon, Teal'Deir, and other anti-SJWs seem to think the patriarchy means some secret club that all men allegedly belong to, where we plot how to oppress women. No, it's a male-dominated, male-oriented system that primarily benefits men, but it hurts a lot of men too. In order to keep men as a class in power, it does more damage to women than to men. In conclusion, Teal'Deir's arguments consist of nothing but boring pedantry and bad arguments. He quickly rose to stardom during the Gamergate years because he was the only cartoon animal avatar, but his ponage style proved to be too boring for his audience, who wanted an even crasser, cruder form of ponage. So they started subscribing to Undoomed, Bearing, and other Teal'Deir copycats. Eventually they got bored with them and moved to the alt-right, or got out of the whole anti-SJW business altogether. With this out of the way, which has been a long time coming, we can finally flush this turd down the toilet.